Did you know if you take the water out of the oceans, you will notice there is dirt underneath? There is. I mean, the oceans actually have a bottom. People say, do you think the continents were connected? I say, what do you mean? Were? They still are. It's just the low places are full of water, that's all. It's not like these are hollow, you know, it's hollow under here and they're floating around like lily pads in a bathtub, you know. Brother Hovind, do you think, you know, the continents were ever connected? I say, well, they're still connected right now. They're always connected, you know. It's just the low places are full of water. You know, hello, it's not like lily pads floating around in a bathtub. Of course they're connected.
Actually, Kent, no. It's exactly like lily pads floating around in a pond. Exactly. And for the exact same reason. And no, the continents defined by the continental crust are no more touching than these lilies are touching. Look, you lifted this figure out of a book for teenagers and put it up whilst you were saying that the continents don't float around like lilies in a bathtub. Let's do something crazy. Let's read the caption to that figure, shall we? Continental crust is much lighter in weight, by which they actually mean it's less dense and thicker than oceanic crust. Yeah, Ken, I think your knowledge of Earth science would be vastly improved if rather than just telling everyone how you've taught it for years.
Which causes earthquakes, volcanoes, you know, I've studied all that stuff, taught earth science for years.
If you'd have actually read some of those Earth science textbooks aimed at teenagers, or at bare minimum, just read the captions to the figures before you put them in your talk. You see, one of the first things you notice about the Earth is there's a sort of density gradient to it, that all the dense stuff is in the middle of the Earth and the less dense stuff on the outside. So iron on the surface has a density of about 8 grams per cubic centimetre. That's about 8 times the density of water. And that's mostly sunk to the middle, where with the added great pressure from being in the middle of the Earth, its density has been somewhat increased. And then you get outside of that iron core and you get onto the less dense sulfur and silicon-rich stuff. And then as you move up towards the surface, you get onto the sort of rocky type materials, which have a density of about 3 grams per cubic centimetre. That's about 3 times the density of water. And then, of course, at the surface, you get stuff like water, which is a density of about 1 gram per cubic centimetre. And then above that, you have the atmosphere, which has a very low density, about 1,000th the density of water. But the pattern is bloody obvious, that the heavier stuff has sunk and the lighter stuff has floated, for exactly the same reason that rocks sink in ponds and lily leaves float. Indeed, there's only one group of people stupid enough to propose that water should have been created underneath the rocks.
See, when God first made the world, the crust of the earth was stretched over. Most of the water that's now on top was underneath the crust of the earth. There were vast subterranean water chambers.
But God had a good reason for doing this. You see, God, being all-knowing, knew that the people that he created would disobey him. So he needed a way to kill them all.
After the curse, then, there was a flood. The Bible says in Genesis 6, God saw the wickedness of man, and his imaginations of his heart was evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he made man, and grieved him at his heart. And God said, I will destroy man, whom I have created, from the face of the earth. It repented me that I have made them.
And what better way of doing that than building in this natural disaster that would kill all of these people into his design?
I believe during the flood, the fountains of the deep broke open, and the water inside the earth came to the top. It talks about that in Psalm 24, Psalm 33, Psalm 136. Talk about water in the crust of the earth.
However, if you think this is crazy, he's just getting warmed up. You see, according to Kent here, God killed everyone because he wanted to leave nice, clear evidence that he killed everyone.
Some people have asked, well, hey, if God was mad at the world, why would he tell Noah to build a big boat? Why not just make everybody die? Can't God say, okay, I want everybody except Noah and his family to die? And they would die. God could do that. Why use a flood anyway? Why make Noah spend, who knows, some people say it took him 7 years to build the ark. Some people say 120 years. I don't think the scripture is clear on the topic. It took him a long time to build a boat that size. Why do that? Well, interesting. Things to consider about the flood. The flood left evidence. A miracle would not.
After all, what all-loving God wouldn't want everyone to know that the best solution that he could think of involved drowning every baby on earth. And of course, what God wouldn't want to leave a nice clear message, which is so clear that no one saw it for hundreds of years, and then it was corrupted by the devil.
And Satan knows this ought to draw people to say, wow, there was a flood, there was a disaster, this thing was buried quickly. And Satan has used very hard to deceive, he worked very hard to deceive people into thinking that the fossils that testify of God's judgment instead testify of millions of years.
Pro tip, Kent. Next time you pray to your God, tell him he needs to attend communications classes. You know, maybe learn how to use social media or send emails or something. Or let me put it another way. Designing people to disobey you so you can kill them seems needlessly sadistic and kinda redundant. Or maybe more to the point about how seriously Kent Hovind takes his religion. He has no problem, none whatsoever, in proposing that God would commit an act of global genocide just to leave some evidence. But for some strange reason, he doesn't think that him merely spending 10 years in federal prison.
I just spent the last 9 years in federal prison over one of the dumbest laws ever passed in the history of humanity, structuring.
Was part of God's plan.
Hey. What's he like?
God? Lonely, but funny. It's got a great sense of humor.
The Bible promises, whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. The Bible says, if you call upon the Lord, you shall be saved. So if you've asked the Lord to save you, he promised he'd save you. I just spent the last 9 years in federal prison over one of the dumbest laws ever passed in the history of humanity.
But coming back to Kent and his argument that continents aren't like lilies. But many of you will say, okay, sure, rocks sink in water and lily leaves float on water. But water is a liquid and iron doesn't sink through rocks. Well, kinda. You see, rocks that we're used to seeing are not hot and they're not under a lot of pressure. The practical upshot is the rocks that we see don't flow, they're brittle and they crack under pressure. They don't flow. Now, clearly if you heat them up enough, they'll just soften and melt. And that one you can see very easily.
Oh my fucking God. Oh fucking Jesus. You have no idea how ridiculously small you look.
But what you can't so easily see is applying a lot of pressure has a very similar effect. It makes them squidgier to the point where you get down to the layer of the earth on which the earth's crust floats. That has a texture more similar to very, very, very thick treacle. I mean, let me just give you an example of this thick viscous flow stuff. If you take a glass of honey and put it in a pot of warm water such that it's being heated at the bottom and cooled at the top, if you just look at it in real time, it doesn't look like it's moving. So as you can see, the honey looks remarkably static. Yeah? And then below it, I've added a heat source, which is just some water, hot water. So what does our static honey look like in time lapse? But if you add a little more time into that, then all of a sudden you can very easily see the convection currents. And those are the convection currents which are moving around the tectonic plates. Now there are two basic sorts of crust. There's oceanic crust and continental crust. The continental plates are thicker and they're less dense. They float better than the thinner, less dense oceanic plates. To give you a rough perspective on this, the difference in density between the continental plates and the oceanic plates is comparable to the difference in density between ice and water. That is, the buoyancy of the continental crust in the oceanic crust is similar to the buoyancy of ice floating in water. So that's a glass of water. And ice cubes float really quite convincingly. So now it's stabilised a little. What you've got is these nice little convection cells where you actually see that the water is coming in contact with the ice. It's cooling down, which is making it denser, which of course means that it sinks.
So you've got a convection cell going that way around, which is the sort of opposite of what we had with the honey, where it was actually being heated at the bottom, which of course was making it less dense, which was making it rise through the cooler, denser liquid. So that's basically what your convection cells in the Earth look like. Cool, eh?
And now, the continents, those areas defined by the thick, lower density continental crust, are not touching.
Brother Hovind, do you think, the continents were ever connected? I say, well, they're still connected right now. They're always connected, It's just the low places are full of water. Hello, it's not like lily pads floating around in a bathtub. Of course they're connected. It's just the low places are full of water, that's all. It's not like these are hollow, it's hollow under here and they're floating around like lily pads in a bathtub, The Earth has a solid crust, okay?
Not that that's particularly relevant, of course. It's just kind of amusing that a creationist trying to be clever ends up showing that he doesn't understand the basics of the system that he's trying to address.
So yes, the continents may be moving some, but that doesn't mean they were, Africa and South America fit. So what? My house and the neighbor's house would fit too if you took the street out of the way. So it doesn't prove they used to be connected. It's just that the shape is pure coincidence.
Yeah, there's just one problem with that. There isn't a mid-Atlantic ridge between you and your neighbor's house where you can actually measure the rate of the spreading. That is, you can see the mechanism which causes the spreading of the continents. As for you and your neighbor's house being on opposite sides of the street, well, we know the mechanism that causes that too. People tend to build their houses on roads for access. We know the mechanisms that create these patterns. We can watch people building houses on opposite sides of the street, and we can measure the rate of spreading. We know the mechanism which causes it. I don't have to watch all the houses being built for the last 1,000 years to know that people building houses on roads for access is the mechanism which forms this pattern. We can actually see the evidence in the actual topographical maps of the ocean floor, and in the fact that most of the ocean floor is relatively new, only 100 or so million years old, and it gets newer as you get nearer to a spreading fault. While the continental crust, being more buoyant, has never really been subducted. Remember the ice cube example? The difference in density between water and ice is about the same difference in density between oceanic crust and continental crust. But to continue with that metaphor, the water might move around with convection currents, but those forces are not high enough to pull the ice cubes under. And that's very much the way it is with the convection currents on the Earth and the continental crust. There just isn't enough flow there to actually pull the continental crust down. And the Earth is broken up into plates, and the plates are still moving a little bit, which causes earthquakes, volcanoes. I've studied all that stuff, taught water science for years. People say, wait a minute, isn't that proof of Pangea? No, that's not proof of Pangea. Textbooks say all the continents fit together. Well, that's baloney. They don't tell the kids the truth about this. This textbook says South America and Africa seem to be a perfect fit. That's a pure coincidence, folks, based on the water level. Well, no, it's not based on the water level. It's based on the position of the continental crust. As for your claim that this oceanic spreading that we can observe is not evidence for plate tectonics, that's some pretty hardcore denial there. That's the sort of denial that would claim that Africa and South America don't actually fit. It's all lies in the textbooks.
The lies in the textbooks.
They had to shrink Africa by 40% just to get South America and Africa to fit. It's the God-honest creationist truth. And it must be true, because Kent Hovind did it himself. Isn't that right, Kent?
They don't tell the kids they shrank Africa nearly 40% to make them fit. If you cut it out get a globe and cut Africa out, and then cut South America out and compare it to what they did in their textbook.
Whereas in reality, with the help of Google Earth, we find this.
Get a globe and cut Africa out, and then cut South America out and compare it to what they did in their textbook. They shrank Africa between 35 and 40%. The lies in the textbooks.
Dr. Hovind taught science for 15 years. Then he got his PhD in education. Hi, my name is Eric, and in this seminar called Lies in the Textbooks, you're going to find out some of those lies that are being presented.
In their textbook, they shrank Africa between 35 and 40%.